welcome to some of our friends came from outside today. Can you raise your hand? No? Everyone's staying for the retreat? Ah, okay, wonderful. Welcome. So we're starting a new course last time on, we're reading through Thay's books on mindfulness and public health, collective awakening. So we'll start with 3 sounds of the bell. Dear respected Thay, dear noble Sangha, I'll start with a passage from Fragrant Palm Leaves. If you want to, you can close your eyes. What makes nature's voice so compelling? The call of moon and forest was irresistible. The storms of the monsoon season also called to me. Even as a young boy, I was always enchanted by storms. Thunder rumbled, the black sky sank low, and the first raindrops, large and heavy, spattered on the roof tiles in our village. Gusts of wind banged against the window shutters. When I saw and heard those signs, I was transported to another realm. They were the prelude to a majestic symphony. After a crash of thunder that seemed loud enough to crumble the earth, the rain began to tumble like a waterfall. How could I sit still at a moment like that? I ran to the window, threw back the curtains, and pressed my face against the glass. Areca palms bowed as earth and sky moaned and screeched. The universe shuddered. Large leaves whipped ferociously against the window. Rain pounded down and gushed in the gutters. Birds struggled against the wind that shook silver curtains of rain. In the symphony of the storm, I heard a call from the heart of the cosmos. I wanted to turn into an areca tree or become a branch bending in the wind. I wanted to be a bird testing the strength of its wings against the wind. I wanted to run outside in the rain and scream, dance, whirl around, laugh and cry. But I didn't dare. I feared my mother's scolding. So instead, I sang for all I was worth. No matter how loud I sang, my voice could not be heard above the roar and clash of the storm. As I sang, my eyes stayed glued to the impressive drama taking place outside the window. My spirit was absorbed by the storm's majesty. I became one with the storm's powerful music. I felt wonderful. I sang one song after another. When at last the storm subsided, it always seemed so abrupt. I stopped singing. The excitement in my body quieted, but I could feel a few tears still clinging to my eyelashes. I still respond to the call of the cosmos, although the way I do it has changed. The call is as clear and compelling as it was those many years ago. When I hear it now, I pause, and with all my body, with every atom of my life, every vein, gland, and nerve, I listen with awe and passion. Imagine someone whose mother has been dead for 10 years. Suddenly, one day, he hears her voice calling to him. That is how I feel when I hear the call of sky and earth. Just yesterday, I knelt by the window to listen to a symphony of rain, earth, forest, and wind. The window was open, and I didn't close it. I just knelt there, my head bowed in respect, and I let the rain drench my head, neck, and robe. I felt so at ease, so complete. Only when I began to shiver from the cold did I stand up and close the window. I changed out of my wet robe and lit a fire while the forest of Medford billowed in the ecstasy of the raging storm. You can listen to the sound of the bell. Okay, maybe that's a little bit better. Yeah, thank you. So this is Thay as in his first stay in the US when he was at the camp for boys in New Jersey, in Medford, New Jersey, remembering his childhood in the storms. Maybe we can just take a moment to send our energy of love, compassion, and healing to those affected by storms right now in Vietnam, in Thailand, the typhoon, and also in Florida. So again, welcome, dear friends, to the second class of this course, which is on Thay's vision for collective awakening. And the first class we were reading Fragrant Palm Leaves, and it's very generous. Parallax Press, when they heard that we were doing this course and reading these books, they offered, I think it's 40% discount for the books. I think it's for both the physical ones, but also the e-books. So if you're online or you're here and you want to be able to get the e-book, or of course we have the bookstore here, so you support Deer Park. I haven't talked to Sister Bookstore yet. I don't know if she can offer a discount. But at least for those following online or reading on an e-book, you can get the books relatively inexpensively. And of course, all the, we're not doing this to sell books. All the profits from the book just go back to support our monasteries, and what we're doing here. So, and so we started looking into Fragrant Palm Leaves, which is a book that is Thay's journals, written for friends and also his followers in Vietnam in the 60s, especially so they could know about Phung Boi, which we talked about last time, the Fragrant Palm Leaves hermitage that Thay started in the central highlands of Vietnam near Bao Loc, and also to write about his experience living in the West. So it was written in Vietnamese, and then it covers as well what we'll talk a little bit about at the beginning of this class, which is Thay returning to Vietnam after being in Princeton and Columbia, and covering the time when the School of Youth for Social Service was started, as well as Hanh University, and then returning to the US finally at the end, at the invitation of Cornell. And that's when Thay begins his kind of public speaking about the situation of the war in Vietnam. And a lot of what he says is covered in the second book, which is, we're starting today. How many of you read it this week? All right, wonderful. That's great. Me too. I mean, again. So you can see it's quite a different tone than this book. And so it's important to remember that this book was written in Vietnamese, and it was very much directed towards friends, associates, young monastics who knew Thay and were familiar with his path in Vietnam. And this book is written for a very different audience. So this book is written for those of us in the West, who, especially people in the peace movement, who want to understand what is going on in Vietnam. Yeah. And so in a way, I see it as a summary of those speeches that Thay gave throughout North America and Canada, as well as Western Europe in 1966, 1967. And it's very nice in this new edition, they also added a number of appendices, like Thay's letter to Martin Luther King Jr. in 1965, explaining the nature of the self-immolation of monks and nuns in Vietnam, as well as a letter to Pope Paul VI, and a statement in Washington, D.C. And even a statement to the Vietnamese in the Viet Cong, the National Liberation Front. Okay, so we'll start. And there were a few questions as well. So I'm not... Let me see if I can pull up the questions. Oh, there was one question I thought that was asked by one, one of the members, so I tried to address it today. And the question was, is there a conflict between being a popular educator about class consciousness and being a monastic? Is there a conflict between being a popular educator about class consciousness and being a monastic? So it's very relevant to this reading. Thay was both a popular educator and a monastic. A popular educator about the situation of inequality in Vietnam. Okay, so that's what we'll try to cover today. I can't hear. Can somebody say? This one. Sorry. This is called Vietnam, Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And I've not received any verification that this was ever published in Vietnam. So if somebody knows, or somebody knows online, then please let me know. But what I've heard, has it been? So in English though? Oh, in Vietnamese? But not officially, or? Yeah, so there's unofficial. And one more thing, so online I put a link in the YouTube video for a Google form. And I think I'll try to collect as well here. It'll make it easier to distribute class materials if people who are in the course can fill in that form. And also in that form is the question from last week, which was, if you remember, what is your vision for a renewed society or a new kind of world? So if you have a moment, even those of us who are here, if you want, you can write, if you've written it down, you can give it to me. But if you want, you can also go in to the form, which is in the YouTube video, and just, you can write it in there. And then I'll try to bring that into the next class. Okay, so I want to continue with Fragrant Palm Leaves before we get into Lotus in a Sea of Fire. So what's very fascinating about Fragrant Palm Leaves is we see a lot of the core teachings that Thay will, of course, share much more about later on when he builds the community of Plum Village and begins to teach in the West. So we see a lot of those teachings are already there in his journals in the 60s, this kind of vision. He talks about, for example, on page 72, in Vietnam, the war is escalating. Our people are caught between a hammer and an anvil. We've lost so much already. The country has been divided in two and engulfed in flames. Even Phung Boi is fading into the fog. But as long as we have each other, we can never be truly alone. We want to stand with those who have been abandoned. I want others, at least occasionally, to turn their thoughts to those who suffer, to think about them, but not pity them. Those who suffer do not want pity, they want love and respect. So, later we hear very often Thay's teaching about not being a victim, and how much we suffer because we see ourselves as a victim and others as the source of our suffering. So already here we can see so the situation of Vietnam and the war, getting arms and ideologies from outside, and brothers and sisters fighting each other. It's very easy for Thay to say that Vietnam is a victim of external forces. But this, he knows that in order to have the deep strength and healing and transformation, it's not good. It's not enough just to adopt that attitude. So I feel very moved by this sentence. Those who suffer do not want pity; they want love and respect. So this teaching is already there very early on, in asking those who pity to instead love and respect those who are suffering. Yeah, that is opening the heart of compassion. Last time I read the passage about Thay's insight when he picks up the book in Princeton and realizes he's the third person who's stood there and looked at this book and checked it out, and he gets a deep insight into non-self. So it's very interesting how this experience of coming to the United States created a space in which Thay could rest. Thay often told us that living at Princeton was like living at a monastery. It was like a peaceful respite where he could come within himself and allow his insight to grow, even in the midst of the escalating war in Vietnam. He talks about wake up. What I call wake up. You know, when we started Wake Up as a movement, which is a movement for young people, Thay originally called it Young Buddhists for a Healthy and Compassionate Society. And that was in 2008. And I remember being in the Kim Lien Hotel in Hanoi. And Thay, myself and the former abbot here, Thay Phap Ho, and Thay Phap Tan, we went into Thay's room to say goodbye. We were coming back here to Deer Park. And Thay wasn't so interested in saying goodbye. You know, Thay practices no coming, no going. But Thay was very fired up and excited about this new movement he had started. And but when he said young Buddhists for a healthy and compassionate society, we thought, wow, that's quite a mouthful. And fortunately, it was shortened to Wake Up. And many of the quotes in this book I feel are so appropriate for the Wake Up movement. Youth is a time for seeking truth. Youth is a time for seeking truth. Actually, any time is a time for seeking truth. But if you're young and you're not seeking truth, you need to look and see where you're putting your priorities. Years ago, I wrote in my journal that even if it destroys you, you must hold to the truth. And we know that Thay was a great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, who taught satyagraha, which is literally holding to the truth. Satyagraha. I knew early on that finding truth is not the same as finding happiness. You aspire to see the truth, but once you have seen it, you cannot avoid suffering. Otherwise, you've seen nothing at all. You are still hostage to arbitrary conventions set up by others. People judge themselves and each other based on standards that are not their own. In fact, such standards are mere wishful thinking, borrowed from public opinion and common viewpoints. One thing is judged as good and another as bad. One thing as virtuous and another evil. One thing true and another false. But when the criteria used to arrive at such judgments are not your own, they are not the truth. Truth cannot be borrowed. It can only be experienced directly. the fruit of exploration, suffering, and the direct encounter between one's own spirit and reality, the reality of the present moment and the reality of 10,000 lifetimes. For each person, it is different. And it is different today. It is as different today, or it is different today. Hold on, I think this is a typo. For each person, it is different. And it is different today than it was yesterday. There must be a... Okay, I found a typo for parallax. Does it make sense? Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, there's actually... We have to do another revision. There's a lot of... Oh no, actually in Lotus in a Sea of Fire, there are a few... We have to do a few typos. Anyway, that's my editing mind. So Thay, throughout his life, had a vision of young people engaging with society in order to find truth in themselves. And there is a degree to which we cannot, social conventions, even the convention of this monastery, perhaps, even the conventions of the 5-year program and all these things, good conditions that we create for young people to explore the truth. Sometimes, I know in my own experience, I had to just go out into the world and without any form, try to remove any kind of convention. For myself, that was after college, going and living abroad, living in Europe, and living in activist communities, squatting communities, anarchists, I lived in an organic farming community, which, I didn't know anything about Thay and Thay's path, but I think a lot of us go through, if we try to really engage with the world outside of forms and conventions, then we find ourselves coming up against the world and difficult situations. And just like Thay did with Phung Boi, and later with the School of Youth for Social Service. And for me it was living in alternative communities and learning how to live off the land and farm, and discovering that the challenge is not to live off the land, the challenge is to live in community. And all the difficulties that come with living in community. So this quote is it's like very dear to my heart, that we need to take that time. We need to have enough, for those of us who are older and we have children, we need to have the confidence to support them in their exploration. Because it's a great tragedy to be caught in the conventions of the world and not to discover truth in oneself. We often talk here, when I talk with Phap Byung especially, about the lack of rites of passage in modern day society. Every society at its roots has some forms of rites of passage. And today we have maybe going to college, but it's arguable whether that's a rite of passage. Usually it's something that's physically, we push ourselves to the limit. So sometimes athletes experience rites of passage in their, pushing themselves physically to an extreme. In some tribes you would do something like a vision quest by not taking very little water or fasting for a long time in the wilderness. Something that pushes us to our limit as a young person in order to see what's really there. Yeah, when we strip away all these layers of convention. And there's some degree to which an institution even like Deer Park, we can't even we can only go so far in supporting that, right? in the sense that we create good conditions for people to transform and heal. But I know that many people will come to Deer Park and then they will go off, and they might. For me, when I went to Maple Forest Monastery, which was our center in Vermont, actually the first center that we had in the United States. When I did my first retreat there, I just had my backpack. And I decided that the retreat was so profound and moving. I'd been on other Buddhist retreats before, but somehow being with the Plum Village Sangha, it felt like family. It felt like this was the community that I'd been looking for. Trying all these different, activist, alternative communities. And then this one, somehow, it touched me in a way I just hadn't experienced before. And I'd been on other Buddhist retreats and gotten a lot of insight and healing, but there's something about this community, that the way that people were expressing themselves and the sincerity, that was just very, very touching. And so I didn't want to go back straight into the world after doing a retreat. So I would spend a week. The first time I didn't know what I was going to do. I just walked out of the monastery. But I ended up spending a week, and I climbed Mount Ascutney, and I made a raft to cross the Connecticut River to the other shore, which is New Hampshire. Which is live free or die, right? Anyway, I did a bunch of things, but to have that experience of of aimlessness, of kind of lived aimlessness, and allowing yourself to, where you're the only one responsible. Like here, Deer Park, we support all of you. We take some measure of responsibility for your welfare. We want you to be okay. If you have some kind of something coming up that's difficult, well, we'll do our best to come and support it, or we'll try to find those who can. And some of us have lived in those kind of environments our whole life. And maybe that's, and it's not to say we cannot touch truth in that space by going within ourselves. But I really resonate with what Thay is saying there. I know that by going out and starting Phung Boi, he was opening a space of unknown, of unknowing, and going into it and seeing what happens, taking a huge risk for himself personally. Later, when we see in this Lotus in the Sea of Fire, when he goes and begins speaking out, showing a third way for the situation of the war in Vietnam. He knows that he does it at great risk to himself. At first, he does not imagine that he will not be allowed to go back to Vietnam. And so he knows that when he goes back to Vietnam, by speaking out in the West, every day his life will be quite precarious. It will have huge effects in Vietnam, his voice in the West. So that's I think a topic for reflection, and maybe the topic that we can reflect on for the next class, which is looking into our own life and seeing what kind of rite of passage or rites of passage do we feel has helped to form us, has helped to push us to a limit in a way that we could gain a deeper understanding of the truth of what our deeper meaning in life is. Maybe we can listen to a sound of the bell. we can reflect on this story as we do that. There was a poor young woman who dreamed of living in luxury, surrounded by jewels and silks. Then she met and married a wealthy widower, and her dream came true. She did not even mind that her husband had not married her for love. In fact, he married her because she looked exactly like his first wife. She agreed to dress, act, and speak like his first wife. At first, it wasn't a problem, but gradually it became quite oppressive. She was herself, yet she had to act like his first wife, to wear the colors she liked to wear, read the books she liked to read, and eat the foods she liked to eat. She couldn't continue. It was suffocating. She was no more than a mannequin on which her husband hung his first wife's clothes and personality. But she didn't have the courage to give up the luxury she had become accustomed to. She was trapped by her own desires. Anyone reading this story will want her to muster the strength needed to leave her husband and return to a simple country life where she can reclaim her true self. We think, if I were in her place, that is what I would do. But we are only outside observers for whom the solution seems easy. If we were actually in her place, we would suffer the same confusion and indecision. Who among us would not? We already do the same thing. We feel forced to comply with the dehumanizing demands of society, and we bow our heads and obey. We eat, speak, think, and act according to society's dictates. We are not free to be ourselves, just as she was not free to be herself. We become cogs in the system, merchandise, not human beings. Our individuality is undermined, yet we comply because we lack the courage to refuse society's demands. We are no better than the wife of that man. We too have become so accustomed to our way of life with its conveniences and comforts that we allow ourselves to be colonized. So the vision of Plum Village Centers is to create a kind of center of resistance. Actually, I see every day here that we come for sitting meditation, for walking meditation, for eating meditation is an act of resistance. I see the I-15 from the monk's residence, and I see all day long, even in the middle of the night, the cars and trucks driving back and forth on the interstate in the distance. And I know that sometimes I am in a car driving on the I-15. So it's not to judge, but it's for the sake of awareness. I'm very aware that while I'm here in the monastery, if I can avoid getting on the I-15, I do my best to do it. I do my best to walk and not get lost in my thinking, because I know that that is the way of the world. And if I learn to just take a step and be fully in contact with the earth, breathe fully, be fully aware of my in-breath and my out-breath, that is an act of resistance. I'm no longer allowing myself to be a cog in the machine. So this is something, and the thing is that we are here for 3 months, many of us, and it's very easy to take for granted what is here. We are co-creating this space of practice together. It's not only the monks and nuns. We are all doing it together, and one aspect of Plum Village practice is that every season we sit down and we look at our schedule and we say, how do we want to live the next few months of our lives? And sometimes we move walking from the morning to the afternoon. Sometimes we have exercise in the morning or in the afternoon. Sometimes we have only, we've tried having breakfast and lunch only and not having dinner. We've tried sometimes just having one big brunch. Sometimes we've had almost no classes. Sometimes we've had 5 classes per week. The point is that we go back and forth, but the community sits down. The monastics sit down. Monastics, it means those of us who live here long term. And we look at our schedule and we make suggestions. And even if we're a lay friend and we're a long-term resident, we can make suggestions and we can change the schedule. And some would say, well, can't we just eventually find the perfect schedule and just stick with it? But I think that misses the point entirely. The point is that as a community, we look at our life and we see what nourishes us, what gives us joy, what gives us lasting happiness. And we make a decision. We want everything that's in that schedule to nourish our joy and nourish our happiness. And so, but if we just come to the monastery and we live here a few months, it may look like, oh, I gotta just follow the grind, the daily grind of the schedule. And I think it's really, that's unfortunate if you have that attitude, because actually, of all the people in the world here in the monastery, you are under the least economic pressure of almost anyone in the world. We have created a situation here where we support people in their practice. So you don't have to think about food to eat, where you're going to sleep. And I'm the same, So it's not, and we're all doing it together. It's not like the monastics are providing that and you're consuming it, but rather we are doing this together. If you're not here, then the monastics cannot be here. So we are all co-creating this space. And when I read in the life of the early Sangha of the Buddha, I see the same kind of situation. The Buddha was looking, and he was even more bold in having a mobile monastery, traveling and getting alms, begging for food from the villages. And the monks, instead of having just, we have our precepts, but we also have the physical boundaries of Deer Park and the boundaries we declare for the rains retreat. The monks often didn't have physical boundaries, they just had their precept, the body. And their precepts is what protected them and gave them a space of practice, even in the midst of the villages, in the midst of the marketplace, or in the wilderness of forests. So that is the spirit of Buddhism for 2,600 years, is a kind of resistance to the machine and the conventions of society. But we also have our own conventions in a community of resistance. And we have fine manners, we have ways of relating to each other. And those ways of relating are for the purpose of growing our happiness. I see a lot of the suffering I experienced in life was because I didn't understand how my words, my thoughts, my bodily actions can make the other person suffer. And even in the community as a monk, I often didn't see that. But as my practice grows deeper, as I learn how to expand my awareness so that it includes other people's experience as much as possible, then I learn the beauty of the kind of fine manners and just simple gestures of respect, like just joining your palms when you see somebody and bowing. It's so beautiful to stop in your path and bow. So when I see somebody doing that, I feel so touched. I don't ever think, oh, that person is bowing out of respect for me. I feel that person is showing their love and their care. And that's why our practice in Plum Village is then to join our palms and bow back to that person. Even if we are a very high monk, if you see Hua Tung Phúc Tin, who is very, very high venerable, and if you walk by him and you walk up to him and you bow, he will also bow to you. In many places, the monks wouldn't do that. You bow to them and they expect you, that is the culture, that you bow to the monk, but the monk doesn't bow back. But Thay created that space where we see this beautiful exchange happening, and we don't see a hierarchy in that moment. So this is the spirit of, we already see in Fragrant Palm Leaves. So I want to, there's some very important passages in here. And there are so many of them, I'm trying to figure out what is most important. So there's this moment where Thay has been in America already for a while. And he said, here in America, I feel an intense longing for the familiar sound of Vietnamese. There are times I think, if I could only hear a familiar voice for 2 minutes, I could be happy all day long. One morning, Phung telephoned, that's the Shangkong. Phung. It seemed completely natural. Oh no, sorry, it's not Sister Shangkong. That's another one named Phung, sorry. One morning, Phung telephoned. It seemed completely natural to be talking to him. Though we didn't talk long, I was in good spirits the rest of the day. No, yeah, it is. This is the unedited text. Here it says, it seemed completely natural to be talking to her. I was quite sure it was Sister Shangkong, but then I had a question. One morning, Phung telephoned. It seemed completely natural to be talking to her. Though we didn't talk long, I was in good spirits the rest of the day. Since then, whenever I talk with a friend, I listen with all my attention to their words and the tone of their voice. As a result, I hear their worries, dreams, and hopes. It is not easy to listen so deeply that you understand everything the other person is trying to tell you. But every one of us can cultivate the capacity of listening deeply. I am no longer indifferent to phenomena that pass before my senses. A leaf, a child's voice, these are the treasures of life. I look and listen deeply in order to receive the messages these miracles convey. Separation from loved ones, disappointments, impatience with unpleasant things, all these are also constructive and wonderful. Who we are is in part a result of our unpleasant experiences. Deep looking allows us to see the wondrous elements contained in the weaknesses of others and ourselves, and these flowers of insights will never wilt. With insight, we see that the world of birth and death and the world of nirvana are the same. One night, while practicing sitting meditation, I felt the urge to shout, "The work of all the Buddhas has been completely fulfilled." Okay, So I'll jump ahead a little bit here. So we see this early teaching already on listening deeply, a core Plum Village practice, listening not only to the words, but to everything that is going on in the heart of that person. Okay, I'd like to read this passage. The night of November 2nd is one I will never forget. It was a moonless, cloudless night, and the sky was filled with stars, each as bright as a child's eyes. In fact, that was the sky in my mind. The actual night was windy and rainy. The windows in my room were shut tight, and I was unable to sleep. I had been reading Bonhoeffer's account of his final days, and I was awakened to the starry sky that dwells in each of us. I felt a surge of joy, accompanied by the faith that I could endure even greater suffering than I thought possible. Bonhoeffer was the drop that made my cup overflow, the last link in a long chain, the breeze that nudged the ripened fruit to fall. Having experienced such a night, I will never complain about life again. My heart was overflowing with love. Courage and strength swelled in me, and I saw my mind and heart as flowers. All feelings, passions, and sufferings revealed themselves as wonders, yet I remained grounded in my body. Some people might call such an experience religious, but what I felt was totally and utterly human. I knew in that moment that there was no enlightenment outside of my own mind and the cells of my body. Life is miraculous, even in its suffering. Without suffering, life would not be possible. There is nothing permanent, and there is no separate self. Neither is there impermanence or no self. When we see life deeply, there is no death. Therefore, it isn't necessary to say everlasting life. For the next month, I meditated on the bodhisattvas described in the Lotus and other Prajnaparamita sutras. These beings are so beautiful. It is easy to understand how their presence beautifies the many Buddha lands. But why confine their beauty to Buddha lands? How about right here on earth? The presence of bodhisattvas is enough to transform the earth into a Buddha land. Who can say that this earth is not a Buddha land? The pole that we raise every year at Nhat expresses the realization that this very earth is a Buddha land. Sometimes healthy, energetic bodhisattvas, like never disparaging bodhisattva and earth-holding bodhisattva, wear ragged clothes. Earth-holding devotes himself to rebuilding roads and bridges in order to restore communication and contact. In today's world, there are countless broken bridges and innumerable earth holdings devoting their bodies and minds. It means innumerable earth holding bodhisattvas, devoting their bodies and minds to rebuilding bridges of communication and understanding among individuals, nations, and cultures. Wherever never disparaging bodhisattva goes, he offers words of encouragement. You have the strength to go forward. Believe in yourself. Don't succumb to low self-esteem or passivity. You will become a Buddha. His message is one of confidence and self-determination. I think about the peasants in the countryside of all the poor countries of the world. Do they have someone to encourage them to believe in their own abilities so they can build a future that they, as much as anyone else, have a right to? Our world needs millions more bodhisattvas like never disparaging. Maybe we can listen to a sound of the bell. So these early awakening experiences that Thay has are coming out of the war, realizing even as he's in the United States, the suffering that is going on in Vietnam, and then expanding his capacity through the reading of Bonhoeffer or other situations of suffering where Thay can learn to open his heart and embrace and learn that actually we have an enormous capacity to embrace the suffering of others. I often reflect back on my own experience of suffering as a practitioner. And one thing that's helped me quite a bit is to see that it's not my own suffering, but it's the suffering of my ancestors as well. That in this body, I mean, I have a white European body, and I know my ancestors came from Germany and Ireland and Cornwall. And that in this body there is the suffering of those mostly peasants, almost entirely peasants, who just worked every day to get something to eat, who had to experience these shifting waves of ideologies. Sometimes after the Reformation in Germany, just one valley over, they were Protestant, and in this valley, they were Catholic. So if you go over there, you could be burned as a heretic, and over here, you could be imprisoned, just because one prince said this is the religion of this land. So this kind of pain and suffering is continued in my own body. I practice to look into, as an American, somebody who grew up here in the States, that at every branch of my family tree, at some point, some ancestor decided to uproot themselves from their native land and come in a boat over here. And the cumulative effect of all of that desire, I think we underestimate. And I always notice how in the US, people are always moving around. If you go to Europe, people are often still living in the village where their grandparents lived, and their grandparents, and their... I know I work a lot with Brother Phap at the EIAB, and his family has had a farm, I think, for 300 or 400 years, the same farm, now that his sister runs it in the Netherlands. So this accumulation of suffering is transmitted, and it includes the suffering of dogmatism, the suffering of hunger, the suffering of anger and hatred, as well as joy, peace. It includes running away from suffering, but it also includes the capacity to embrace. It also includes compassion. So when I read this passage of Thay, that's how I try to practice with it, to see how in my sitting meditation, in my walking meditation, am I just distracted by thoughts about projects or the news going on here, or am I really getting in touch with these rivers of suffering as well as rivers of compassion that are in my own heart, that have been transmitted to me in this body? And that is, for me, the real work. And that's what mindfulness really gives us, the capacity. Because we all have experiences of suffering, but how we transform it and how we understand it and the experience of it can be quite different. So I cannot do it for you, and you cannot do it for me, but we can support each other. And what a practice center is a place where we support each other to do this work of deep looking within ourselves, deep listening. I want to, before just starting and addressing the question, just to touch on, there's so many beautiful things, but to touch on a little bit of the description of the work of the School of Youth for Social Service when Thay returns to Vietnam. So this is a vision Thay had for in the School of Youth for Social Service of what they called self-help village. So it's a village which takes care of its own needs, its own difficulties. This village is the site of an experimental development project my friends and I initiated right after I returned to Vietnam. We call it a self-help village. This is on page 124 to 125. We call it a self-help village, and it will serve as a model for the kind of community Steve, and Steve is Thay's roommate in Columbia University, they shared an apartment with, the kind of community Steve and I used to talk about. The name Self-Help Village conveys the idea that this is a village where citizens share a collective responsibility to develop the local economy and provide for education and healthcare. Collective responsibility. We want to uproot old attitudes of passivity, waiting for someone else to make a difference. We have recruited friends with organizational skills who are willing to learn the challenges of rural life by actually living here among the villagers. We hope their presence and know-how will catalyze a spirit of self-determination among the villagers. The villagers have accepted us as family. The building I am staying in has 4 rooms. 3 belong to the village school and 1 serves as a clinic. This building was planned and constructed by the villagers with the encouragement and assistance of our friends. At present, 2 of our friends, Tam Quang and Tam Thay, lived here full-time. The rest of us return as often as we can. We learn from the villagers and try to test our ideas with their support. We have another experimental village in nearby Tao Dien. So this is an example of the kind of vision and the kind of implementation that followed that vision of the School of Youth for Social Services. So it means not just giving money for development projects, but going into the village, volunteers, gaining the trust, living with the villagers, working with them, and learning about their challenges, not assuming what their challenges are, but actually going there and living and listening first. Yeah, when Thay tries to explain why are people joining the Viet Cong, the National Liberation Front, he explains that they wear simple black clothes like the peasants and share the three togethers with the people, eating, living, and working. They cook, sweep, wash dishes, and harvest rice alongside the peasants. They stay overnight and discuss concerns. Government cadres cannot hope to compete with the National Liberation Front. That is why the government is losing ground daily in the battle against the NLF. So all of these things are informing. It's not only to understand about the war in Vietnam, but it's to understand how Thay is creating a vision for collective life, for community life, that we continue to try to learn about and realize here in Deer Park. So I was sitting listening to the brothers after the community work day we had on Saturday. So it was amazing. I mean, isn't it amazing to just stand there in a circle? And I know I was working with a group, and we went down to the rock pile, and we were suddenly, 15 minutes before, we're just standing in a circle singing songs, and then suddenly we've got a line of people moving big rocks, one person to the other, and then like a kind of snake. And somehow it all just happens magically. Like we don't have to say very much. We kind of know what to do. There's a kind of wisdom. And then we drove up the mountain, and we created an entire kind of civil engineering work, like putting in a pipe for runoff, and then putting stones around it and fixing it in place, and then covering it with dirt and making a bridge in the space of 2 hours. And I think, wow, with the practice of mindfulness and everyone listening to one another, I sometimes found myself, I have to slow down, Brother Phap. It's kind of getting out of breath and getting, because we had about 16, 17 people. But that is the kind of thing that I feel like, when I can work with my co-practitioners, with people in my community, or like on a cooking team, being on the cooking team, figuring out like where to walk in the kitchen, like anticipating people's minds. I love it. We have like 6 people on our cooking team, and it's really complex. Like where is Walter going to walk next? Where is Lynn's going to walk? So that we can kind of get around the kitchen without like smashing into each other. So all these things are like that's growing our compassion and our understanding for each other. And this is the kind of wisdom that Thay learned early on in the School of Youth for Social Service. Okay. So there was a volunteer in the school named Tu. Tu told me about a recent conversation he'd had that touched me deeply. One day, seeing how hard he was working, Mr. Bay asked him, "How much money do you make working here?" This is in the School of Youth for Social Service. You can ask the monks and nuns, "How much money do you make working here?" It is a question we are frequently asked. Tu answered, "We are not working for money, but for merit, uncle." Our teacher says that doing good work to help our friends in the village builds merit, the same as doing good works for the temple. Because in Vietnam, normally you make offerings to the temple, you do things for the temple, and that you get merit. It's a very punya in Sanskrit. The idea of merit is that something we generate. It's not something you can quantify, but by doing kindnesses, one for the other person. Primarily, you do it for the Buddhist temple, but here, in this case, the workers for the School of Youth for Social Service are doing it in the interest of social service. The temple provides us with food and a little bus money, but that is the only salary we receive. Uncle Bay understood, and he gazed at Tu with great affection. No doubt he was thinking how fine these young people are. He had thought that city youth were all spoiled and only cared about having a good time. Who could have guessed that there were youngsters concerned about receiving merit? Tu's response was perfect, as good as anything to be found in the Buddhist scriptures. His words expressed the meaning of engaged Buddhism. And then Thay shares a little bit about merit. Engaged Buddhism in Vietnam teaches that good works do not need to be reserved for the pagoda, but can be extended to towns and villages. To explain to Mr. Bay, people are suffering so much that even the Buddha no longer sits in the temple all the time. The Buddha himself goes out to the people. I was surprised at how skillfully Tu expressed these ideas. Buddha does not just sit in the temple anymore. Of course, every temple in Vietnam has a Buddha statue just sitting there on the altar. Of course, the only reason he ever did was because people placed him there. The only reason he ever did was because people placed him there. But the Buddha does not want to be isolated amidst offerings of rice, bananas, and flowers. How can a Buddha or a Bodhisattva stay indoors? If Baisajja Guru, medicine Buddha, spent all his time in the temple, who would heal the people's wounds of body and spirit? Avalokiteshvara must continue to move if she is to hear and respond to the cries of those who suffer. It does not make sense for students of the Buddha to isolate themselves inside a temple, or they are not his true students. Buddhas are to be found in places of suffering. Tu said it perfectly. We do not need to borrow the words of famous theologians like Teilhard de Chardin, Karl Barth, or Martin Buber to tell us what to do. We are already, in our own way, bringing about a revolution in Buddhist teaching. Young people like Tu are leading the way into new streams of Buddhist thought and action. They are giving birth to engaged Buddhism. Okay, so maybe I can turn to the question. Is there a conflict between being a popular educator about class consciousness and being a monastic? How many of you have some kind of monastic aspiration? You mind? Okay, wow, 10, at least 10 or 11 of you. That's wonderful. So this is what we're doing together, right? This is we are co-creating a community, and when we wear the robes like this means we're doing it full time. But just because we're not wearing the robes doesn't mean we're not doing it full time. Yeah. It's very difficult to describe how much impact even just one monastic can have on the world. I know I don't want to say that you can't really see it unless you're living it, but because I see that many lay people also, they're aware of that. You know, that's why they support the monastic community. So, but I can say that I've been a monk for 19 years, and I've seen many monastics come and go in our community. And so I don't have a kind of controlled experiment, But I can see that the impact of those monastics who stay is extraordinary. As a monk or a nun, we don't have to think about many just basic things about, like, we don't have to rent an apartment, we don't have to pay an electrical bill, we don't have to make sure that we paid our, that we have health insurance, or that we've gotten medical checkups or anything. These are things that occupy a lot of the worries and concerns of all of us out there. If we don't have those things, if we don't have health insurance, we don't have the money to pay our bills, it's a lot of stress, daily stress. So we make the commitment to live simply so that we can not have to spend our time thinking about those things. And we also don't have a family, a blood family. We don't have children. For me, the creating, and by becoming a monastic, we're also creating the Sangha. That's what's hard to see, because when we're coming in as a new novice, it looks like the Sangha is there, and I'm going into the Sangha, but you are creating the Sangha when you are a monastic. And your experience of suffering is also changing the Sangha. But it often doesn't change it in ways that you expect it to, or you want it to. So I can say, on the one hand, when you become a monastic, you have to let go of all your expectations of what it will be like as a monastic. Because if you continue to hold on to those expectations, then you'll find yourself in conflict with somebody inside of yourself, and also with others in the community. But that's a way also of helping us to learn how to see that what Thay is saying, that truth is found in life. Truth is not found in our concepts about life. So what I have experienced is that the letting go is where I get the most powerful insight. It's the most difficult, but it's so worth it. It's like Thay says, they're the insight that the flowers that will never wilt. That insight becomes like a stable platform for your happiness, and also the happiness of many other people, because you create a space. It's like every day you're an activist creating a space for others to take refuge in. And not only monastics do that. I'm constantly bowing. Some of you in this class, like, I bow to you as lay people, because the bodhisattva work you do inspires me every day. So it's not about necessarily being monastic or lay, but if you have the conditions to become a monk or a nun, then try it out. Because every day you live as a monk or a nun is going to make your life happier and make other people's lives happier. It's not something that you have to wait until you're 19 years in a Dhamma teacher teaching a course about collective awakening. But like every day, your way of living is bringing happiness and joy. And the suffering you experience, my practice is to say, okay, the suffering I'm experiencing now, living in the Sangha, is like 1/10 of what I would be experiencing out there if I were working in a job or I were doing something else. And I think it might even be less than 1/10. But because in the monastery we're looking at things like so precisely, like we're looking at them under a microscope. So sometimes we experience that suffering to be so huge. But it's because in our everyday life we don't necessarily look and embrace the whole root of our suffering in the way that we can when we have this space that's held by the Sangha for us to do it. So I feel that yes and no is the answer to the question. You have to let go of all your expectations about what a monastic will be. And in that way, you're like creating, you're getting in touch with this creative impulse where you don't know what it is that you're going to do as a monk or a nun. You don't know. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know, will you be at Deer Park? Will you be at Plum Village? Will you be somewhere else? Who knows? A new center we haven't created yet. Will you be teaching in a slum? Will you be teaching at Harvard University? We don't know. Maybe both. But the point is that somehow you're learning through compassion that you gain from your own experience of suffering how to really understand other people. And the kind of transformation you can bring about is, I would say, even more profound than bringing about a revolution in class structure. Yeah, the Buddha was creating a space where wherever somebody was coming in from, they were treated with equanimity, with love and care. And for those of us who read the story of Old Path, White Clouds about Shravasti, right, the untouchable young boy who becomes a Buddhist monk, that's very concrete. The Buddha was seeing these class structures forming in India, so he tried to create a space, but it had to be a spiritual practice. He saw that it's not enough just to change the outside structure of society, because if we are still embodying within ourselves those structures, then we continue to create them. So I'm always, I practice a lot of humility, but I'm also sometimes proud and caught in my own ego, and I have to let go of that. I could join another tradition where, you're a monk for 19 years, you're like a high venerable and you have many disciples. But that's not the Plum Village way. I listen to my young brothers, even if they just ordain. I have to listen to lay friends who have opinions about me and the way I do things. And I might not like that, but I can always grow from it and learn from it. And I think that's a deeper kind of path. So, yes and no. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so there's much more I still want to cover in Fragrant Palm Leaves. But I think it's just going to be like that there's just so much great material that we just have to enjoy on our own reading. And okay, so then we will plan to start Vietnam Lotus in a Sea of Fire, and also bring in Miracle of Mindfulness in the next class. And if we can just so two things. If you're online and you want to follow this course, I cannot promise anything. I don't know, because I don't want to take on too much. But if I have some help, maybe some people will help me with the course, and we can put out materials. Like I'll try to make available the notes that I'm making for the classes, so you can read the passages, even the ones I don't cover. And maybe some other things, some other materials. I'm trying to, my hope is to create a space where, online, where I know those of us here are able to have conversations, but for those of us online, to also be able to have kind of conversations. And so I'm trying to look and see what a good format would be for that. So if you're online or here, if you can sign up on the form, the Google form, then that would be helpful. Okay, and the question for next week to reflect on is, what kind of rites of passage have you experienced? And if you feel you can write something about that. And again, you don't have to submit this to me. This is just for your own reflection. Okay, thank you. I'll finish with 3 sounds of the bell.